Well, President Biden is on his way back to Washington after a day-long visit to Israel, where he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet, and stated in a public address, quote, "The terrorist will not win," end quote. The president's planned second stop on his Middle East tour, a summit with Arab leaders in Jordan, was abruptly canceled yesterday by Jordan's King Abdullah, possibly due to the now disproven claim by Hamas regarding the bombing of a Gaza hospital. Rocket exchanges are continuing on Israel's northern border as an invasion of Gaza in the south remains imminent. Joining us now live from Jerusalem to discuss this is CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you, Tony.
Thanks for staying up late. I know it's been a long day. Tell us about the events today with the president, with President Biden being there with the war cabinet.
Well, that sort of was the focus of attention. Well, two things, actually, Tony, the visit by President Biden and also that rocket attack last night that has since, as you said, been disproven. The focus was the meeting with Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. He also met with the war cabinet. I don't think that's ever happened before. I think there was a mixed reaction from my perspective and the people that I've talked to, Tony. First of all, very excited about the president coming, but a little wary as well. What are the strings and what is going on behind the scenes? There was a report yesterday by a mutual friend, Carolyn Glick, that maybe Anthony Blinken was really putting strings attached to the munitions that Israel needs to make sure that they can defeat Hamas. One of those is bunker-busting bombs for the underground, tunnels, maybe 300 miles of tunnels, believe it or not, inside Gaza Strip. So they want to make sure that the U.S. is supporting them, but not putting too many strings on Israel to do what it feels like it needs to do to defeat Hamas. Tony, last Saturday I was in the kibbutz Be'eri. That was one of the kibbutzes overrun by Hamas. There are 1,100 people in that kibbutz. 100 were murdered, slaughtered, and that's where some of the horrific stories we've heard of women, children, elderly being killed, as well as babies and even beheaded. So I think Israel, as somebody said to me that today, was 99.9% in it to win it. And I think that's the mood of the Israeli people over here now.
In terms of strings that the Biden administration may be putting on the supplies coming to Israel, what kind of strings are we looking at?
Well, one thing I think is going to be the humanitarian aid that they talked about. And I think at one time it was going to be, from Israel, but Israel's not going to do that after what happened on October 7th. That's one thing. And the other thing I think is make sure that as many Gazans do get out of harm's way, and that's Israel's doing what it can to drop leaflets, to text people, call people to get them out of harm's way. I think the other thing, which I think Egypt has done by now, is open the Rafah crossing for many Gazans actually to leave. But the concern is, are there any restraints on Israel? They're pretty glad about and very satisfied that two carrier groups are going to be here, and also perhaps as a deterrent to war with Hezbollah on the northern border. But there are some who are arguing that maybe Israel should preemptively strike Hezbollah because it represents a strategic threat far greater than Hamas on the southern border, maybe 10 times the strength of Hamas.
Talking about preemptive strikes, Iran was saying that they may take a preemptive action against Israel if there is a ground invasion of Gaza the day before yesterday. President Biden did not make any mention of Iran in his public remarks today. What is the latest with the threats from Iran?
Well, that's what the foreign minister did say 2 days ago, that if any ground invasion comes in, that they will respond. They have their own calculus to make, whether or not they do want to go into a full-scale war, a regional war with Israel, and the possibility that the U.S. would back them up. So we'll see. And I did get a report not too long ago, but I don't know how reliable it is right now. I'm just kind of vetting that out, but possible rockets coming from somewhere in Iraq with 1,000-kilometer range, but that remains to be seen. It's quite the political and geopolitical brinkmanship going on right now up in the north. Tony, it seems like Hezbollah is raising the threshold, but may not want to go too far to go with a direct conflict or a major escalation with Israel.
Chris, you've been on the ground there a long time in Israel, over 2 decades. What is your sense of the geopolitical environment right now globally? I mean, this seems to be an unprecedented moment.
I agree. What happened on October 7th really changed the whole paradigm, I think, and it changed certainly for Israelis. And I think the whole geopolitical landscape here in the Middle East is very unstable and very uncertain. And maybe that was one reason why the president wanted to come here. At the same time, I mean, you mentioned, there's some uncertainty there on Capitol Hill. And if that can be stabilized, I think that would be an asset for Israel. But to your question, Tony, geopolitically, it's very, very unstable. What will Iran do? What will Hezbollah do? Will Israel attack, the ground incursion that has been seeming imminent for days now? And, what involvement Russia may have, or China, and Saudi Arabia for that matter. I mean, 2 weeks ago, Tony, we were talking about possible peace between Israel,
right?
The U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And now, and I think that was one of the intentions of this whole attack by Hamas, was to disrupt that possible peace deal that would have been a game changer here in the Middle East.
I mean, this seems like a unprecedented moment of biblical proportions. When you look at this, Chris, how I mean, you're right there in the middle of it. I mean, you're reporting on it each and every day. You're tracking this. How should Christians be viewing this moment? How should we be praying into it? But how should we understand it according to what Jesus has warned us about and what Scripture tells us will eventually occur?
Yeah, not too far from here on the Mount of Olives, about 2,000 years ago, he told us what the signs of the times would be. There'd be wars and rumors of wars, nation rising up against nation, and earthquakes in various places. Not too long ago, I was in Morocco after a 6.8 earthquake, and back in early February, 7.8 earthquake, I guess, in Turkey. I think he said, look up for your redemption draweth nigh. And I think that's one thing we need to do in the midst of all these. It also says in Psalm 122 to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I think that's something we need to do. And the sons of Issachar in the book of Chronicles, they were the ones who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. So I think Christians should be informed. They should be educated. They should be prayed up and praised up. And I think this is a time also to be standing with the Jewish people in Israel. I was listening to someone earlier today, Tony. It seems like Israel's the only country that has a stopwatch on it when it needs to defend itself, and that stopwatch is ticking. And we were in a place called Ofakim where we saw some 50 people were murdered there on October 7th. And in the last several decades, there were about 50 people that had been murdered in all of that time. And we talked to one visiting. He had been born in Ofakim, but he was visiting. And he said it's about 10 to 14 days before the Jews, they have the sympathy, and then the clock seems to run out.
Yeah.
And
so true.
It's something that the Israel has been facing maybe since 67 war, 73, 82, all the way through its history. And here again, the clock is ticking. And at the very beginning, Tony, when we were starting to talk to people, they were saying, listen, in 10 days or 2 weeks, when the images change, when maybe people in Gaza, innocent people may be in harm's way, then the whole narrative may change and the sympathy leaves Jewish people.
And we've got to pray about that.